Megan Ramos here with another episode of the Fasting Method podcast. Today I'm joined by my lovely co-host, Dr. Nadia for a Q&A episode where we answer your questions. Nadia, how are you doing today?
Doing great. I'm always excited about these types of episodes. I love answering these questions.
Yeah, I like getting the information right to the people because so many people need our help. It is crazy. Recently, my husband and I were in El Paso, Texas, and I didn't see one person who didn't have metabolic syndrome walking around. And there were so many events happening that weekend. Many weddings, graduations, quinceañeras. It was just crazy. And people of all ages struggling with metabolic syndrome. So we really got to get this work out there. And if people have questions, you can send them to us at podcast@thefastingmethod.com. So we're going to dive in. The first question says, "Hi, I'm a nurse and I work night shift from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. I usually follow a 24 IF eating schedule. So that's 20 hours of fasting followed by a 4-hour eating window on my days off. But I'm struggling to figure out how to fast during my night shift schedule when I work 2 to 3 nights in a row. Do you have any suggestions for fasting and a night shift schedule?" This is a great question. Night shifts really tough on the body, and flipping back and forth between night shifts and having to function during daytime hours, it really puts a lot of wear and tear on us. Back when we had the clinic in Toronto, we did have a handful of patients who were nurses at our hospital. They saw the transformation in all of the patients that would come through our clinic, and they would want to experience that too. But the grueling hours, the weird shifts, trying to juggle back and forth between being nocturnal and being awake during the day really caused a lot of whiplash, and they weren't quite sure how to figure it out. So there was a rule of thumb that we used for these individuals. And the rules were, number 1, don't have your first meal for a good 3 to 4 hours after waking. And make sure that you have your last meal, if you're to have a meal, about 3 hours before you go to bed. No closer to bedtime than 3 hours. And we put these restrictions to help people try to navigate how to do fasting. So if you're someone who works a night shift from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., there's a good chance that you're not getting home until about 8 a.m. and you're not going to bed right away. You're going to do errands, some chores around the house, get laundry in. So depending on when you go to bed, you want to try to schedule your quote unquote evening activities for having a meal that occurs about 3 hours before you plan on going to bed. So if your bedtime is going to be, say, 12 noon, then maybe you should make a priority of eating that meal when you get home. So if you get home at 8, going into the kitchen, getting that meal started, and then trying to, wrap up eating as close to 9:30 as possible. Then that way you've gotten in a good few hours. So if you were to do, say, a 24-hour fast 3 times a week and you had a week of night shifts, that's what you would do if that quote-unquote dinner was going to be what you were going to have. You would eat around, say, 9, go to bed at noon, and then you would wake up and then go to work for your shift. So we would use that 3-hour window to help us figure out the timing for your intermittent fasting schedules. Another popular one that people enjoy when they are night shift workers is doing the 48-hour fast. So we've just found in general that one meal is doable, but trying to coordinate 2 or 3 meals on eating days, intermittently around fasting days with night shift to not be as manageable. It can be, especially if you're a nurse working at a hospital, it can be really difficult to get a meal in or coordinate a particular meal. And also, fasting can help our circadian rhythms a lot. So doing a little bit more fasting tends to be more beneficial at helping you fluctuate between being present for your night shift and then also being present during the daytime when you aren't working the night shift and you go back to sort of everybody else's regular schedule. So I'm a huge fan of the 48-hour fast for this reason. So you're not trying to fit in 2 or 3 meals on your eating days. So you would essentially go from, say, if you ate at 9 a.m. on Monday, you would go fasting until 9 a.m. on Wednesday. And it just really simplifies things. You're not trying to figure out how to eat certain things at work, getting the timing all right. You're just keeping it pretty simple, clean, straightforward. So a lot of the nurses that I would work with, we would really try to structure in those 48-hour fasts. We would get creative with their schedule, trying to schedule in those 48-hour fasts. It just always worked the best, minimize the number of meals as much as possible. And we would always break their fast once they've gotten home, but really put that 3-hour rule in before bed. Nadia, do you have any different strategies?
That's really great, Megan. I think important things to remember here. Historically, nurses have been a big part of our community. We've had a lot of nurses. Shift work has always been a topic that's come up. So just within our community, I've learned a ton from nurses and what they share with us. I think my biggest point here is no matter which one of these schedules you choose and whichever one works for you, right? I think that there's a couple of things that I think all nurses that I've worked with have always said to me, right? Which is, if you eat during the night, and I don't recommend that you do, that is what nurses do, right? That's what people do when they're working. And it's not just nurses. I have a cousin who works for TAP, the Portuguese airline, and he's a plane mechanic. And so his shift work, it's very similar to nurses. Like he works a few days in a row night shift, and then he has a couple of days off, and then he works a few days day shift. It's just messed up. And this has had a major impact on his metabolic health, insulin resistance. It's very obvious. And so this is the main thing, is we know this is not great, and we know it's having a major impact. But when people that worked shift work, at night shift work, actually do eat at night, they tend to eat, unfortunately, a lot worse than they do during the day. So nurses tell me this all the time, that the night shift is riddled with junk and junk food, and people will bring it in, and there's a very good reason for that. I mean, you are craving, your insulin is highest at night, you're awake and you're not supposed to be awake, so your body's craving all of this stuff. And if you feed that insulin beast, it just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And then they tell me that in contrast, the day work, right, when they work day shifts, it's totally different. First of all, it tends to be a lot busier. They don't even have time to really think about food. And there's a lot more of this positive influence on each other too. Oh, don't forget to do stairs. Don't forget to drink your water. Whereas the night shift crew, it tends to be exposed to all of this insulin and all of this junk food. So I think that no matter which of these schedules work for you, I love the idea of the 48 because it's really my favorite, of course, all the time. But it would make your life a lot easier, right? So regardless of which of these work for you, just keep that in mind. It's actually going to be a lot easier for you to not eat than to choose what to eat during a night shift. Okay, Megan, I'm going to take question number 2. And I'll tell you why I chose to add this question today. Of course, we get tons of questions, and a lot of them are repetitive. And I think that I'm a big fan of repetition. I say this all the time. I think that the more that you hear something, the more it starts to make sense to you. And over time, hopefully the easier that it will get. This is a question that I would be happy to answer on every single podcast Q&A. I have a question about coffee with heavy whipping cream. Does this break a fast? I think that we've answered this many times, probably every single day. And for many of you, as I said, this is repetition, right? For others, it might just be the first question that comes to your mind when you start intermittent fasting. So when we switch to a low carb diet, specifically a ketogenic diet, people tend to consume a lot of nuts and dairy. It's a natural transition, right? Because you're getting rid of the sugars, the more processed foods, the carbier foods. And so you're switching to more real foods. And of all of these real foods, right, probably the dairy and the nuts are going to be the most appetizing. And so initially when you transition to a more real food, low carb diet, you might be having a ton of nuts and dairy. And that's okay. I did that. I think everybody did that. The other thing that you may do, very naturally, I did as well, was transition from having coffee with milk and sugar to having coffee with heavy whipped cream. I did that as well. And what I realized is that I loved it so much that I wanted to have a ton of it. I didn't want to just have one coffee with cream. I wanted to have 2 and 3 and 4 and 5. And it was something that I realized very early on in my journey. And when I realized that, I started to look into this a little bit more. And then, of course, I learned that even though dairy and nuts are real foods, great foods, I don't like to categorize foods as good or bad. They're also low carb, of course, but they are moderate to higher in insulin production. Okay. That's the reason why when you eat them, you want to eat more. That's one of the reasons, right? Why when you eat them, you don't feel necessarily like you're done, satiated. You want more and more and more of it. So your question, does coffee with cream break a fast? Well, technically, yes. But to me, the biggest concern is not whether cream breaks a fast or not. It's whether it's going to have a significant insulin response and whether it's going to help you fast longer. If you find that having coffee with cream, and I'll tell you that I did, if you find that having coffee with cream just makes you want to have another coffee with cream, or it makes you want to nurse that coffee for a much longer time than I would advise, right? Because we are looking at TRE and whatever you consume both on your eating days, and if you're having a fasting aid on your fasting days, you want to consume it very, very quickly in a short sort of drinking or eating window. So if you're finding that when you have coffee and you put cream in it, that you're wanting to have more and more, and your fasting is becoming harder and harder, you're actually getting hungrier and hungrier, and you're noticing that you're nursing that coffee with cream, then this is not working for you. So what I'm saying is that I don't find that coffee with cream is a great fasting aid. But yes, it does break a fast because it does have quote unquote calories, right? It does raise insulin, yes, a moderate to a significant amount. That will depend, I think, on your insulin resistance. So dairy is one of these big topics. I'm always happy to talk about it. And this answer may actually bring up some more questions for you guys. So send your questions in. Let's hear from you, Megan. What do you think?
It's in our nature to find something that fits in the rules, but that we find comforting, and to see just how far we can take it and still make progress. Mark Sisson actually said that when he did a special expert Q&A within our community. You know, we have these security blankets, and we got to test the limits. And I see people do this so much. They'll make all of these extravagant changes to nutrition. They'll do all of this stuff with fasting, but it's hard for them to let the cream go. And we really need to ask ourselves some tough questions. Why is that? What am I looking for comfort? And are there other things outside of food where I can find that comfort? Whether it's going for a walk in nature, spending some time with a pet, listening to some music, doing some breathing exercises, calling a friend that makes you laugh. There's got to be other outlets that aren't food related. And I think that's so important to make real sustainable change in the long run. You know, when it comes to these quote unquote fasting training wheels, you've got to think of them as just that. It's cool when you're a toddler to have training wheels, but you do not want to be the kid at 18 years old showing up to grade 12 in high school with training wheels still on your bicycle. That's just not going to be very cool. Think of it too as if you have a busted ankle, you know, using crutches will help you get from point A to point B faster. But if your ankle's not busted, using crutches is only going to slow you down. You got to think of these training wheels as that. And it's got to be something that you're going to have to monitor yourself if you want to use it to help you come off of worse things like drinking tons of soda, sugary soda or artificially sweetened soda. If you want to transfer to having some coffee with some heavy cream, okay, you can have this intermediary step, but you've got to have a plan. You know, there's got to be a plan there. I remember trying to train my adult self to eat duck eggs. Duck eggs I had no reaction to. I knew they're like nature's vitamin. They're one of a handful of foods that is a true sort of multivitamin. And I knew how important that they were going to be for me and all of my future plans. So I liked berries. So I would have a small amount of berries, and I would have to eat my eggs before I would allow myself to eat my berries. I'm in my 30s, and I'm parenting myself like this. And then once I had the taste for eggs, the deal with myself was, okay, you know, you don't need to have those berries. Those berries don't need to be a reward. But I had that plan from the beginning. You have to have a plan to execute and to try to eliminate these potentially problematic things. And I see cream and coffee be such an emotional crutch for people in our community. And I often see it being like the number one cause of plateaus and continued inflammation, and it just seems to be undoing a lot of the good that people are trying to do through their diet and fasting. So if you're going to use it as a crutch, use it as a crutch, but be strategic about it. And, have a game plan for the long term. Just don't wing it day by day. Nadia and I, we're just recording a future episode with our colleague, John, talking about journaling, like getting stuff down on paper. When we make that commitment to write, whether it's our feelings or whether it's a game plan, we're so much more likely to follow through. So come up with a game plan. Okay, if you want to come off of the soda and have some heavy cream, sure, but have a game plan, or else you're just going to end up dragging your heels in the sand forever. Alrighty, the question number 3 is, I would like to know what you eat when you're doing a fat fast and how to eat. Do you still recommend that I follow TRE? So there's 2 different applications for a fat fast. One, you can just elect to have fat fasting meals and combine it with any fasting protocol like TRE. So say you're doing 342s, and on your eating days where you're having lunch and dinner, you want to have fat fasting meals, absolutely do so. It can be a great strategy to help you try to get in some longer fasts during stressful times, during holiday seasons, summertime especially, because there's just more eating in general, and the more we eat, the more we want to eat. It can spike our appetite. So a lot of people do more fat fasting in the summertime. So you can use fat fasting in combination with any TRE or fasting protocol to enhance that protocol and suppress your appetite. Or you can use fat fasting as an application to reduce your appetite. If that's the case, if you're really struggling with crazy cravings, wanting to eat all of the time, feeling like your hunger's totally out of control, sweet things that you would never usually eat are suddenly looking really good and tasty because you're struggling with the sugar issues, then when you approach fat fasting from that angle to help sort of extinguish your appetite, then you want to eat anytime you feel hungry or you have a craving. So when you first start fat fasting in that sense, you might be eating several times throughout the day. But the thing about fat fasting is that it will start to regulate your hormones. And over time, you'll go from eating several times a day to maybe eating once a day. And then you find that, hey, I'm just starting to fast naturally. I'm actually getting in control of my appetite. I'll use this example that I share in the community. My wedding, I got married on January 2nd. I don't know what lunatic gets married right after Christmas, but I was that lunatic who did that. I was also a lunatic in the sense I got married in a different country where my fiance, my now husband, he didn't even live in that state. So I was living in Toronto. He was in San Francisco. We got married in Orlando. I hadn't seen my wedding venue. Our families hadn't met. We hadn't met most of each other's families. Like it was just, we got engaged after 7 months. So it was just really wild. So I show up to Orlando at the beginning of December with the best of intentions, but the stress broke me. And the stress and then the desire to also want to enjoy certain quote unquote rituals, because I didn't have the skill set to participate in those rituals in other ways. So there was definitely a lot more dessert, enjoying family time at Disneyland and saying, oh, but I'm at Disney World or Disneyland and I'm going to indulge in X, Y, and Z because I'm here. Those are things that I wouldn't necessarily do now. But my appetite was nuts. Like, I'm amazed I fit in my wedding dress come January 2nd. And when I got home, even things that I found disgusting, like dates, were suddenly appealing. Like, I felt like I was a drug addict who was ready to binge on anything that might give me a high. So I actually used fat fasting for 2 weeks. And those first few days of fat fasting, I felt like I was eating all of the time. But by the second week, I was doing TRE. And by the end of the second week, I was fasting naturally. So you can let it happen organically to suppress your appetite. Now, how do you fat fast? We talk about this a ton in the community. We have all kinds of guides on it. But you really want to pick either 3 or 4 fatty foods, and you'll make all of your meals out of those foods, or you'll want to pick just 2 or 3 meals that might have multiple ingredients, but are the same meal that you're eating in repetition. So an example might be something like a chopped salad. It's got several ingredients. You've got fatty dressing, you've got eggs, you've got bacon, you've got chicken, you've got quite a bit of fat. So that way, when you have a meal, you're eating chopped salad, chopped salad, chopped salad. So the idea is to pick fattier foods or fattier meals and eat them in repetition. That repetition has a huge impact on our hormones to suppress our appetite. And this repetition actually even works with other awful foods. Thinking back to that wedding time with all my bridal showers and whatnot, my friends would always and family would always prepare the same foods. My favorite meal over and over and over again. And I freaking hated that meal by the end of all of the events, even though it was like a higher carb processed food meal. I just couldn't eat it anymore. Like, I'd rather eat a head of broccoli than eat those foods with the repetition. So you want to pick a few fatty foods or a few meals that are fatty and eat them over and over again in repetition. And on that note, for more plant-based individuals, you can still fat fast. It might be slightly different because you're not gravitating to a lot of the animal proteins like salmon or chicken wings or bacon, but things like olives are really fatty. Avocados are fatty. Their oils are fatty. So olive, avocado oil, coconut oil, you can use all those to make other vegetables fatty. So you could have a salad that you eat over again and over again. You could have leafy greens that you saute in coconut oil and eat those over and over again. So you can use these plant-based fats to make plant foods more fatty in nature. So really anybody can fat fast.
I love this fat fast conversation. Anyone that comes into my meetings knows this is something we talk about daily, because often people will say, oh, I'm feeling this way. And I'll say, oh, well, that means that, your insulin's really high. You're in a hyperinsulinemic state. The insulin beast has moved into your house. What you want to do is tame the beast. And my favorite strategy to tame the insulin beast is fat fasting. And I personally use it all the time. I'm actually fat fasting today. I was talking about that in my meetings today. And so just like Megan said, basically fat fasting, and we have lots of resources on this. You can easily get the what I call the original fat fast list of, those 8 main things that we talk about. You can easily get that from any of our resources, but I'll go through them very quickly. And this is the original fat fast list that I still use as the base of my food pyramid. The leafy green vegetables, the healthy fats, of course, plant-based or animal-based, eggs, bacon, salmon, sardines, and then you've got the olives and the avocado that Megan mentioned and their oils. So these are the original 8, as I call them. Of course, over time, there have been a lot of modifications, and you can modify this, as Megan said, you can choose 3 or 4 other foods. So you may get confused because you're going to see this list and then you're going to hear people talk about, well, how about chicken wings? Well, that's a modification, right? That has worked for many people. We've learned over time. So I fat fast all the time. And what I do is I actually do stick to the original 8 of the fat fast list, but I will pick a couple of recipes. For example, today I had because for me, it's the end of the day. I had an omelet, just eggs, and I like sardines and leafy greens. So that was my morning meal. And I would do that for a couple of days. Usually I find that one day of fat fasting gets me right back on track. That's where I am at this point. I don't have to do 2 weeks, but I can totally understand why Megan, after that wedding and right after that wedding, the only wedding, right after the wedding, which was after Christmas, New Year's, and all the stress, why it would take you some time to tame that insulin beast. But today I had that omelet with sardines and spinach, actually. And for dinner, it's what I call my fat fast salad. So it's got all of the fat fast foods that I want to put in there. It's usually simple. It's the leafy greens, so lettuce in this case. I put olives and avocados in there, and then I put bacon bits, and I put eggs. I season it with olive oil, vinegar, and salt. And I tell you, it tastes amazing when you're doing a fat fast, because what the bonus is, you tame the beast, you stop craving, and you stop craving junk. And so the food actually tastes amazing. And that's what I do. That's my strategy for just feeling like I'm in control of my cravings again. All right, so let me take you guys on to the 4th question. Most doctors will order fasting glucose, fasting insulin, cortisol, and A1C to check for insulin resistance. Are there other markers, laboratory or clinical, to know if your insulin resistance is improving after, say, a year of fasting? Well, I am actually going to take you to Coach Lisa. So Coach Lisa is one of our colleagues, and I joke that she's our resources queen because she always has a list and resources all over our community. And I often send this to clients. And whenever you guys send a question, if I can send you to one of Coach Lisa's lists, I certainly will. And so in our community forum, if you do a search for Coach Lisa and NSV. NSV stands for non-scale victories. Of course, scale victories are, so meaning weight loss, is another marker for reduced insulin resistance. But Coach Lisa has a huge list of things that we've learned over time, either personally, like ourselves, or through clients. So in her huge list, she actually broke things down into categories. So she's got like hormonal and immunity benefits. So that this of course includes changes to like her leptin, for example, and her immune system becoming stronger and more resistant to bugs and viruses and whatnot. She also talks about something super interesting that I actually mentioned today in my meeting and when we were interviewing someone, but people talking about bladder incontinence. She actually put that down as one of the things that she saw improve with lowering insulin over time with fasting. And then all the neuro stuff. So migraines, this is a big one. I also suffered with migraines before. What I actually realized was rebound hypoglycemia. I was getting a huge insulin spike every time that I ate because I ate very poorly. I ate a lot of processed stuff and very carby foods. And then an hour or two later, I had this rebound hypoglycemia and I had a headache all the time. And I never knew that that's what it was. So some of you might find that improve over time. And then she talked about mood, of course, and brain fog, vision. This is a big one, especially for diabetics. So your vision improving, that's a sure sign of insulin resistance improvement. Hearing better, of course, increased self-esteem. Everybody needs that. All kinds of stuff. Rosacea and other autoimmune conditions and expressions improve tremendously over time for many reasons, but likely one of the main ones is because as you lower insulin, you also tend to lower inflammation. And that was going to be one of my next things that I was going to say. A big sign that your insulin resistance is improving is lower overall inflammation and pain. And there are some good resources out there, even outside of our team, some doctors that we have met and worked with that work a lot in pain management and inflammation, arthritis, and all these other concerns and conditions. So rosacea comes up all the time because rosacea is so obvious and it's on your face, right? So it's something that people obviously are very uncomfortable with, and they're surprised when they start fasting that in a very short period of time, and because it's so obvious, the rosacea either tremendously improves or it goes away. I learned this years ago in clinic. I had one gentleman, who really wanted me to give him the detailed explanation of why his rosacea went away, something that he'd had for, I guess, 30 years or whatnot. So that's a good one. Skin tags is another huge one. So a lot of these are skin things like acne and PCOS women, acanthosis nigricans. So a lot of these skin conditions and expressions are tremendously improved or they go away with improvement of insulin resistance. Then there's the hair, of course. Again, the chin hairs, that's another big one for PCOS women. Fungus and all kinds of other stuff, fun stuff like that. I mean, the list just goes on and on. Cardiovascular pulmonary, of course, victories, and that's blood pressure was a big one. That was one of the ones that I unexpectedly, so I was diagnosed with hypertension really early. I was in my 20s and I wasn't overweight. I didn't know at the time that I was already insulin resistant. And so I was diagnosed with hypertension. I was put on medication and I was told it was chronic and I was going to have it forever. And because it was primary, meaning there wasn't a reason why I had hypertension, it was sort of like, well, it's for life, chronic, unknown, probably genetic, which makes no sense because nobody in my family seemed to have hypertension except for my grandparents who were already in their 80s. So anyway, a few months into this lifestyle and my blood pressure dropped significantly and I had to get off the medications because I was super dizzy and I even fainted. And so that was a very unexpected, but of course now we know, very common NSV, non-scale victory, and a sure marker of improved insulin resistance and metabolic syndrome. Anyway, Megan, I could go on because this list, believe it or not, goes on with lots more. What would you say to this person?
Only thing I'd add to Lisa's epic list, and I'm certain it's on the list, is that cravings change and they go away. Like now I am as happy as can be with some good Brussels sprouts, and never in a billion years would I tell you that I would prefer Brussels sprouts over a plate of potatoes. But I hands down now will have a plate of Brussels sprouts over a plate of potatoes any day. And it just totally confuses the heck out of everyone from my past, like family members, friends that I grew up with, went to school with, that just saw my crazy dietary habits, and I will have cravings for Brussels sprouts. It is just the wildest thing. And I can actually leave potatoes on my plate now when I do have them. So I will carb cycle a couple times a week, and I don't have to worry about eating all of the potatoes. It's just really, really wild how things change and transform. So I grew up on the diet of McNugget Happy Meals, Domino's Pizza, and a Canadian restaurant chain called Swiss Chalet, whose French fries you dipped into this gravy, and it was just used to be the greatest thing ever. So I grew up just eating that. Like I didn't have broccoli for the first time till I was like 29 years old. I didn't eat Brussels sprouts till I met my husband, and he insisted that I had to try his Brussels sprouts. I mean, I met him when I was 30. It's just so wild. I did not eat any of these foods. I had the bland, beige, starchy, processed food diet for years. What so many people now refer to as the autism diet. And that's how I ate. So if I can transform, if I can crave Brussels sprouts and I can leave potatoes on the plate, anybody can do this. So thank you so much, Coach Lisa.
You're laughing, but I am laughing. I had to mute myself because every time you say potatoes, I think of my dog. And I'm like, why is she eating my dog? And now I think, why did I name my dog Potato? You should have named one of your dogs Potato.
Oh, mine have weird names too. My whole family has weird names. But yeah, potatoes. Potatoes were a big vice of mine. Anyway, we have evolved over here, and if we can, you guys can too. Thank you so much for joining us for today's episode. We'll be back next week. We're interviewing our good colleague, Coach John Clary, and we'll be talking about some men and fasting related items, in addition to John being our maintenance king for both men and women. So lots of good info coming next week. But bye for now, everyone, and happy fasting.
Bye, everyone.